if you just play hard, you stick out nowadays. You know, I know when we all grew up, if you didn't play hard, you stuck out, you know, and
Right.
I think there's a lot of different reasons why, you know, and I won't get into that, but just, do you like baseball? Do you like playing 5 games on a weekend?
Hello, happy Monday. Hope your Monday has started well. Hope your week has started well. Welcome back to another episode of the 5-Tool Baseball Podcast, episode 12. I am Dustin McComas, joined by Drew Bishop. Oh man, I need
it's Monday.
This morning.
It's Monday.
It feels like a Monday. Now, we talked last week about not knowing what day it was. Today definitely feels like a Monday. Our sports weekends were salvaged by NFL teams. Yep. Cowboys, big win at New England.
They're big for real.
Steelers winning very ugly, but in the NFL, a win is a win. Doesn't matter how it looks. And also another big ALCS game tonight with the Red Sox, which two grand slams in that game too. That was wild. Did not expect that one. But Drew, how are you doing? How was your weekend? Minus what happened on the collegiate football level.
There will be no further comment on Texas football until we win again, assuming we do. But got to see some good baseball the last couple of days. Watched some games out at Melissa on Saturday, and then spent my time yesterday bouncing back and forth between Rockwall and Heath, and just a lot of good baseball, different age groups, playing hard. I feel like right now these kids have been a little bit re-energized versus what they were at the end of the summer. So that's been
weather
nice.
Helps.
No doubt. No doubt. It had to wear a jacket. I know you like the 40s. And man, we're still waiting on that 5-tool hoodie from Brooks, but so it was good. We had a bunch of good baseball going on, and it was fun to get back out there and watch kids compete and play hard.
Yeah, I was down at Premier on Saturday and Sunday, and it was good to get down there. And like you said, a bunch of different age groups, saw some 2025s, which kind of makes my head spin. 2024s, 2023s, saw some 2022s as well. And I'm going to type up some of those notes today. You can probably find those on 5tool.org later today, or definitely early tomorrow afternoon. But yeah, good to get out and see some high school guys again. And I'll be back down at Premier next week for what looks like a really loaded event to kind of as the fall starts winding down. But we're not going to waste any more time because we have our first guest. Yeah, believe it or not, somebody actually agreed to jump onto our podcast for episode 12. It's a guy that we know really well, Sean Allen, University of Texas pitching coach, recruiting coordinator. He's done it all and he's seen it all. He's been at FIU, Tulane, Sam Houston State, now Texas. At one point, he was the hitting coach at Texas. Now he's the pitching coach, coming off of what I believe they led the nation in ERA last year, if I'm remembering correctly. I should remember correctly. I was a damn beat writer, for crying out loud. But coming off a very, very successful season at the University of Texas, long, deep run into Omaha. Great job with the pitching staff, and really exciting times on the 40 acres. A guy that you know better than I, Drew. Looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, I think, the thing about Sean is Sean's done it for a long time. Like we said, he's been on both sides of the ball as an offensive guy, and now is going back to being a pitching coach. But, I don't know how much people understand, number one, how difficult that is. And really two, how selfless that is. I know for a guy with his stature and reputation in the college baseball world, and I even had some interviews for some head coaching gigs, making a change to the other side of the balls can be risky. And I know Coach Pierce had all the confidence in the world that he could do it. Coach Pierce actually had a similar background where he did both pitching and hitting at Rice. So he believed in Sean, and Sean took the role and ran with it. And obviously in his first full year as the pitching coach, like you said, led the country in pitching. So, I think the world of Sean. He's a close friend, a great baseball coach, a really good developer of talent. and just has a good feel for what a college kid needs to develop and get better on, whether it's on the field or off the field. And, I think we're really lucky to get him and have him as our first guest, and excited to hear it.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely a future head coach for sure. And I'm just in my head thinking about, from the tech side, you go from hitting to pitching. And now with the pitching is kind of on that frontier of there's something new seemingly every year from the analytical side. And that's something I know that Texas does a really good job of incorporating as well. But let's not waste any more time with us two talking. Let's get to the guy. Here's our interview with Sean Allen, University of Texas pitching coach and recruiting coordinator. Our first guest, happy to be joined by Texas pitching coach and recruiting coordinator, Sean Allen, on today's podcast. Sean and I go way back. He goes even farther back with Drew. But first off, Sean, do you miss either one of us? I have a feeling that you might miss one of us pretty substantially, and it's not the guy talking right now.
Yeah, you're probably right on that one, Dustin. But I appreciate you having us.
Let's first just open, how's the fall going? You guys are coming off an Omaha trip, a really great and fun and successful season. You guys are kind of getting to the swing of things with scrimmages and things like that. You get the Fall World Series upcoming. How's the fall going for you guys?
It's going well. The group's just like they were last year, just a ton of fun to be around. They bring it every single day, and that's kind of the unique thing about this group. It's carried over from last year's. They just love to play. They love to compete, and that makes it fun. You know how fall can get. It can get long. You kind of get boring at times just because there's not a ton of outside competition, and they seem to love competing against each other and let each other know about it a little bit, and it makes it fun. So overall, on the pitching side of things, it's been good for the most part, throwing strikes and just trying to get a few guys rehabbing off TJ, just get them back on the mound and get them comfortable, and we'll see how it ends up. But they're doing well, and it's been a fun fall so far.
And we've done so much recruiting talk on these previous episodes, kind of doing an informal recruiting seminar, just really trying to give parents and players some background about the process and a lot of things that maybe they've never even considered thinking about, asking about, whatever it is. For you, you've done this for so long. You've been a recruiting coordinator for so long. I feel like the recruiting game is constantly evolving, constantly changing. Is there one thing that you wish maybe parents or players knew more or just knew in general about the recruiting process that you kind of come across a lot of times and you just kind of think in your head, man, I wish they knew this about the recruiting process? Is there anything that kind of sticks out? Is it maybe that the timing element? We talked about the recruiting calendar. It's not like you guys can go spend 6 months on the road recruiting guys, and oftentimes it's a look or two looks and you're kind of going from there. So is there something that you wish that, the parents or players out there listening that kind of they considered a little bit more about the recruiting process?
Well, first off, I think it's awesome you guys are doing this. Obviously, Drew's had a ton of experience actually being in an elite program that, he knows the ins and outs of it, and to be able to give that information out to parents and kids, it's pretty cool. And I think they need to definitely listen because it's real information. Going back to your question, I think the probably the biggest thing is just understanding each situation is totally different. I think kids get lost in the fact that their buddies sending Twitter out and they committed in the 9th grade, and so they panic and do some things that maybe that's not really what they wanted to do, just because a bunch of their friends are already committed. And I think each situation is totally different. Each family is it's a totally different situation, and they need to do it on their time, and just not worry about the Twitter glory and all the social media that's out there, because I really think that's driving a lot of the early commitment stuff, is just to say they're committed somewhere and spend 2 days of getting a bunch of likes and retweets, and it's cool. I get it. But at the end of the day, it's the biggest decision they've made in their life to this date, there's no doubt. And I think it needs to be done the right way.
Yeah, Sean, I think one thing that'll help too, and something that I would just think is interesting is, you've spent time at University of Houston, at Florida International, in Miami. You've been at Sam Houston, Tulane, and now Texas. What changes, if anything, from place to place? I know you've obviously had to shift quite a bit in how you present offers, and what you've been at different types of profiles of schools, with private versus public, some academic institutions, and then now Texas is a little bit of a combination of both. It's a public school that's thought of pretty high academically. As you've gone from stop to stop, how has your recruiting I guess in attention shifted? Like, what types of things do you have to pay attention to that are different from place to place?
The biggest thing is the financial side of things. Every university is going to be able to offer some things that other places might not. As a coach, you're trying to maximize that 11.7 as much as you can. Pretty much everywhere we've been, except for Texas, we've had additional aid. At FIU, you have Bright Futures, that is a program that's part of the lotteries there in the state of Florida. And, a certain GPA, certain test score gets you X percentage of tuition covered, if not 100%. So that changes in the fact of, who you go after in state, what you can offer them. And then on the flip side of that, it allows you to go out of state and spend a lot of money on some out of state guys, because you're saving for, equivalencies on in-state guys. And so just figuring out that landscape with each university is probably step number one. Then obviously step two is, okay, what do we sell? What are the key things that we're going to try to present that maybe pushes us over our competition? But really just understanding, how do we maximize 11.7? As you know, Drew, you've been involved with it a bunch, and it's an every single day task trying to figure it out. Especially nowadays, we're dealing with at least 4, if not 5 different classes, throwing the transfer portal, and then throwing the draft on the front side or the back end of a high school career. And then obviously with your current guys, it's funny, but it's tough. But when they pushed the draft back, we had a couple guys all of a sudden turn into being draft eligible sophomores. And that, you're not planning on that 2 years ago, and now all of a sudden they're draft eligible, and it changes the landscape. And I think the biggest thing that, to put out there is, from a parents and kids perspective, it's always changing. The landscape's changing within each university. So don't panic. Like, I told a story yesterday at camp, like, we signed Bryce Elder late June after his senior year. The guy ends up almost signing for $1 million and is the Braves minor league pitcher of the year this year. So you never know when it's going to happen for you. Just keep working and understand that it's ever evolving. Like, when people say they're out of money, I'm not so sure that's really true at the end of the day, if you're the player that they're looking for.
Yeah, you mentioned Elder, and I think, Drew, you mentioned the other day that Corey Knebel was another guy that was a late ad guy. And there he is in the postseason, being the opener for the Dodgers. Bryce Elder, minor league pitcher of the year for the Braves. It just goes to show you that, just because you're uncommitted right now or something like that, people will find you if you're good. And even if it's late in your senior year, you can still end up at a place like a Texas and go out and perform and reach those aspirations. You mentioned the transfer portal, Sean. How much has that changed the recruiting dynamic? At Texas, relative to some other programs in the country, you guys haven't had a lot of turnover in terms of people running in and out constantly, but the transfer portal it can be a very impactful thing. I mean, you add a Mike Antico, when Duke Ellis unexpectedly signs with the Chicago White Sox. How much has that changed, not just roster construction, but also recruiting from the budget standpoint as well?
It's changing, and we're still trying to figure it out, to be honest with you. The fact that, okay, do we try to save some money back for that portal? I think the biggest thing for us personally is making sure we still get the right fit, the right kid. Coach Pierce talks all the time. He doesn't want the best players in the country. He wants the best team. and it's about figuring out how do we maximize our 11.7 to put the best team on the field. There might be a really good right-handed pitcher, power arm that we love, but at the end of the day, we need a left-handed starter, And so I think that's a situation where if we don't find it in the junior college rank, then now we're like, okay, we'll be patient and see if something pops up in the portal. And obviously, if the good thing about it is if the draft happens and you get hit pretty hard in the draft, and all of a sudden you have some money available, you're able to go sign some experienced players. And at the Power 5 level, being super young is probably not a real good idea going into, especially the last year or two with COVID. Having a really young team's probably not real good, just because everybody's got a year back. Everybody seemed like they're a year older. Last year, you're getting 5th, 6th year, veteran hitters out, and it's a difference. Getting a guy that's had 500 at bats is much more difficult to get out than a guy that's in his first year.
For sure. Yeah. And Sean, I'm sure quite a few people listening to this know your background and that you've changed from the hitting side to the pitching side in your career, kind of a similar path to what Coach Pierce did. How do you think that has shaped, if anything different, how you've looked at things on the recruiting trail? Do you look for different things since you have experience on both sides of the ball? Do you try to change the amounts of money you allocate to different positions? How's that change affected any of your recruiting as a recruiting coordinator?
Yeah. Good question. Probably a tough question because, I think it does change. I think, working with guys day in, day out, you have an idea of what you like, what you don't like. Probably see things a little different after, being in the grind with pitchers, and, where can we make some adjustments? Those adjustments happen quickly, or, a guy or situations where, okay, we got to clean up an arm path. That takes a lot longer than cleaning up a lower half. So, you go out to see a guy and you don't love the arm swing or the arm path, and it might be a little more hesitant. When I was on the offensive side, it's like, well, you can clean that up, and I've done pitching in the past too. So I had an idea about it. But I think the biggest thing is, again, we're trying to put together the best pitching staff, the best offensive group. I think, being here now, going on 6 years, Coach Pierce, Coach Miller, Tulo, and myself have figured out kind of what the position group needs to look like from outfielders to infielders. Obviously Texas is a place where we better really run in the outfield. And, we've really realized that just having the guys that we've had out there. Pretty much we've ran 3, center fielders out there for most of our time here at Texas, and, see direct benefit from that. So, just again, putting together the best team. But I do think it allows myself evaluating a pitcher to probably make a little better decisions versus just basing it on what they do against a hitter, or what they do against a lineup. It's okay, how can we make this guy better? Understanding the analytic side of things a little bit better, and seeing a young kid that, spins the fastball really well, that might be a mid-80s guy, but he really spins it. He's got a lot of induced vert. Josh Stewart's a great example of that, a freshman that's on our team right now. He was a guy that when we committed him, he was 84, 87, but had a ton of carry in the fastball, and, he's made a velo jump, and he's got a chance to be really good for us. So that's just a small example of maybe taking some of the stuff I've learned on the pitching side since flipping over now with a ton of the analytics side of things, and using that information to our advantage.
Yeah. The time spent recruiting, how would you compare the time you spend in terms of the actual evaluation time at a field compared to the background work you do in terms of trying to nail the makeup? Because to me, that's the most difficult thing for you, for pro scouts, for anyone that's in the sort of talent acquisition, let's say business, for lack of a better word. How much time would you say you spend doing the background work compared to just actually having eyeballs on a guy at a game or a showcase or whatever it is?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest with you. I mean, I learned this from Turtle a long time ago, and he recruited with his ears a lot. Just listening to people, talking to people, getting different opinions. The one thing that he would do a lot, and we have a kid on our team right now that kind of did the same thing. But if there was a kid being recruited by a couple schools that could really hit, and they recruited a bunch of hitters, and we were kind of on the fence about him, he would take a chance on him because maybe he was an out-of-state kid that we only saw a couple times, didn't have great contacts to get to, figure out the makeup and all that. He would listen with his ears and just see what's the landscape. This school, these three schools really hit. They're offensive and they're recruiting the kid. He probably can help us. I think that you can do the same thing on the pitching side, but you like to know what you're getting in a kid. I think that's my biggest thing is, okay, what are we truly getting from a makeup standpoint? It's really hard to figure out, right? I mean, you don't really know until you're in the trenches with the guy, until he starts to struggle and, kind of backs up against the wall. Then you kind of realize who you have, and you're not really going to figure that out until they show up on campus, but you at least want to be close. And I think the hard part is finding people that are going to tell you bad things about kids. For the most part, all you hear is, oh, he's awesome, he's unbelievable, he's the best guy we ever had. I'm like, that's great, but like, what does he need to work on? Where does he need to get better? And maybe we can help him in that way. And I've learned a lot from Tulo in the side of like the makeup piece in college baseball goes a long, long ways. Like you get a bunch of tough guys that want to play, want to practice and get better. You have a chance to really compete at a high level. Now the talent piece definitely comes into place, but that makeup is massive. And I think that's the one thing about the early recruiting. I know when I was 14 or 15, I had no idea what I was going to be, looking back on it. You don't know, like you have a 15-year-old that's not driving, like there's a lot of things out there that, it's kind of crazy that we're doing what we're doing as an industry, but it is what it is. That's where the market is. And you still have to do your background checks on those kids, and then, hopefully help mold them as they grow throughout their high school career and end up with the right kid on campus.
Yeah, Sean, we get this question a lot from parents and people that we come in contact with. Can you explain a little bit, like you show up at a field, maybe you have a specific kid you're looking for, but it's a place that's going to have a bunch of good players. What kind of things stand out to you when you're watching kids? Because then I know a lot of times, obviously, the big velocity, the guys hitting home runs, but a lot of times I feel like I end up telling people you're looking for the easy stuff more so than the obvious stuff, as far as playing hard, doing things the right way, the fundamentals. What kind of things specifically are you looking for on the pitching side when you go watch a kid, or a position player that you're not aware of that has to stand out to you?
I think the biggest thing, and it's, for whatever reason, I won't get into that, but if you just play hard, you stick out nowadays. I know when we all grew up, if you didn't play hard, you stuck out, and
Right.
I think there's a lot of different reasons why, and I won't get into that, but just, do you like baseball? Do you like playing 5 games on a weekend? If we see a position player we like, we pretty much want to sit on that guy, get 20, 25 at bats if we can. If the schedule allows it to happen, okay, he punches out back-to-back times. How is that third at bat? How's the fourth at bat when he struggled in that game? Is it competitive, or does he panic and he's in swing mode and is trying not to strike out for the 4th time? In between innings, how do they interact with their players? How do they interact with their coaches? Are they, a top step guy, really like their teammates? Do their teammates like them? And that interaction is big for us, because I think it says a lot. If they're selfish, unselfish, those types of things from a position player standpoint. And I think just, again, do they enjoy baseball? Like 8 a.m. game, who are they? And I think that you can find out a lot when you're watching that showcase game that doesn't mean a whole lot. What do they do? You know, hopefully if they're playing a championship game and playing for stuff, then that's easy. If they can't play hard in those situations, then they're definitely not going to be a guy for our program. On the pitching side, probably the number one thing is how do they move down the mound? Is it athletic? Is it, you know, how do they move? And then number two, do they have an out pitch? You know, do they have a pitch that we feel like they can get elite college hitters out, that we're not going to have to teach them? Because if they do, we can help with everything else. You know, the velocity for me, I want to see a guy pitch, command it, have an out pitch, and then see if, you know, if he's a 88, 90 guy as a junior, okay, great. Like, does he pitch? Does he command it? And how does he compete? Because that velocity is going to come if, you know, if he moves well down the mound.
So let me back you up just a little bit. You're telling me that if you go watch a kid pitch, the number one thing you're looking for is not them just trying to blow it out and throw as hard as they can.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's, again, that goes back to where we are in amateur baseball, which it is what it is. I want to see a guy pitch. Like, at the end of the day, pitching is about getting hitters out, plain and simple, whether it's at 75 miles an hour or whether it's at 95 miles an hour. Now, don't get me wrong, like, there's not a ton of right-handed pitchers in college baseball throwing 84 miles an hour. So I do think there's a fine line there. But I think at the end of the day, that should be, if you're working on velocity, go do it on the side. Go do it in between your start. Go compete, go get hitters out, and then let the velocity happen. I think so many guys chase the velocity when they're in a big environment and they end up having a bad outing, don't command the baseball. And I promise you, most college coaches want to go in there going, all right, he can command it. He spins it well. Maybe the velocity is a tick light, and then it goes back to body, projectability, all the rest of it. But the max, you know, guys that are head whacking and trying to throw it as hard as they possibly can, spraying it all over the place, those guys typically are guys that don't have success at this level.
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember how many times I've seen a guy command a fastball with a good changeup and get a ton of outs in college. Or, you know, a guy like Tristan Stevens is a good example. He can sink it. He can spin the slider. He's not ever going to throw mid-90s, and there he is logging a ton of innings in the Big 12. Sean, you mentioned the athleticism element. You know, since when you guys arrived at Texas with Coach Pierce, there's been a noticeable shift in the types of athletes Texas has recruited. A lot more athleticism, a lot more kind of projectability, but also a lot more dual sport guys as well, and even two-way players as well. You know, what is it about that type of athleticism and that sort of makeup that you've noticed positively impact your program? I mean, you got a couple freshmen that arrived in this year. You know, Ace Whitehead, for example, was a big time quarterback as well. What has kind of attracted you guys to those types of athletes and that type of skill set?
I think one, just believing in our development. That's probably one of the reasons why, you know, we want to get the athlete, because we feel like we can definitely make them better. And then that athleticism shows up day in, day out. Eric Kennedy, the guy's been unreal this fall. Like, probably the best fall we've seen since we've been at Texas. But the speed just never goes into a slump. You know, even last year when he was going through some struggles, you knew if he put the ball on the ground, he had a chance to be safe at first base. And so having those elite athletic players, we feel like we can develop on the offensive side. It helps from the defensive standpoint. It helps to put pressure on the defense when we're on offense. And that's, you know, one of the things that we want to do is we want to be able to force the issue if we're on offense on the defensive side and have them play faster. And I think the only way to do that is have elite athletes. Duke Ellis is one. Like, when I saw Duke and in junior college, I'm like, the bat's light. He needs to gain some weight, but the dude's an elite runner, you know? And so you can't teach those things. And not to say we're going to sign every elite runner out there. They have to have some baseball actions and have a feel for the barrel and all those things. But I think just trusting our development is key. And then on the makeup side, Coach was a former high school coach that coached a lot of different sports. He's been around a lot of different players, and it just puts them in a different environment to have to be a better teammate, have to be around different, types of teammates, and I think that's big, being able to just get that makeup and that kid that's been through some things. Tate Shaw was a, big time. I don't know if he's a big time football player, but he was a football player, and it showed up on the field. That guy played hard every single day, was a low heartbeat guy. And so, we feel like we need some of that on our team to kind of spread that makeup throughout the locker room.
Sure, Sean, earlier you're talking about roster allocation. When you guys are sitting around deciding, like we talked about, types of allocations for different positions and pitching, we always had to build an outfield that could run playing in a big ballpark. Do you foresee that any of that's going to have to change with the move going to the SEC with different types of ballparks, maybe a little bit different style of play? Do you think that's something that you're already looking at as far as roster construction, or is that so far away? I mean, obviously we don't know the exact timeline, but is that something that might have to shift some as we move to the SEC?
I don't think so. I think good baseball is good baseball, no matter what level you're at. I really like last year's team. I really like this year's team, the way it's constructed. We finally got to a point where we have some left-handed options on the mound. The one thing that's a little scary this year is we're pretty right-handed dominant in our offensive lineup, depending on who ends up winning some jobs. But, I think that's the one thing maybe a little bit in the SEC is, you run up against a first-round arm that's right-handed and you're really right-handed dominant, it might be a tough day. I talk about if you had a right-handed dominant lineup with Ty Madden on the mound last year, he's going to dominate, right? I mean, the numbers just tell you that. So being able to maybe have a couple guys that aren't everyday players that are good players on the bench, being able to come off the bench, and whether it's pinch hit, spot start, those types of things are definitely things that we need to do a better job of. But I think, again, we play at least 55 to 65% of our games at Dish Falk, and we need to protect our home field. So we're going to construct our lineup around that.
Well, and I think I always thought it helped too, moving to the new ballpark in Omaha, that plays very similar to the Dish. Mm-hmm. And, it always, I thought it was an advantage for us because, when for a long time, the SEC was just a big power hitting conference, and I always felt like when I was playing that, the pitching was a little bit behind, but now, the level of pitching has stepped up so much there, and teams are definitely built a lot more to win in Omaha now. And I think it's something interesting that you have to pay attention to, because you couldn't just be a big bopping team going into Omaha like you could at the old ballpark.
For sure. And I think, Tennessee was really, really good last year, and Tanner Witt goes out in 5 1/3. And I'll be honest, if we play them at Tennessee or an offensive ballpark, it's probably a different score for sure, whether or not we win or lose. But they hit some homers without a doubt. But he's a high fastball carry guy. They like to hit the ball in the air, and we thought it was a really good matchup, and it ended up being in that ballpark. But I remember throwing a couple fastballs in there, and they hit them, and you watch their hitters, and they think they got it, But at that place, it ends up falling into a glove and outfield. And so, and the other thing about the SEC and their ballparks and those things, like you take an average hitter in our place, you put them in an offensive ballpark, they're going to be better in those places. Like the average power guy at our place is going to turn into a 10 or 12 homer type guy when he goes on the road, but he can defend and be athletic. And, for me, those teams that are really good in the SEC, they win 2-1 games. They win 3 games on Friday nights. And so how are you going to do that? It's going to come down to really pitch, play really good defense, and then come up with a clutch hit. But, hey, we got beat in Omaha because Mississippi State was able to bring a guy off the bench and steal a base, And so those are the things that I think that the depth of the roster needs to. I think it's good now, but that's definitely something that we'll look into and see if we can't take advantage and get a little better there.
Yeah, gotta figure out ways to win games in a lot of ways up there in Omaha. And I'd like to see Ivan Melendez play in some of those SEC parks on a consistent basis. That would be pretty fun.
He hit a ball. He hit a ball yesterday or 2 days ago. The one he hit over the monster and up that week that he went crazy. He hit one the other day in their squad. 457 dead center field with no wind blowing. I was like, I looked at Chulo and he goes, "I've never done that." And I'm like, okay, that's impressive.
Yeah, for Tulo to say
12-year big leaguers say that, perennial all-star guy goes, "I've never done that." It's pretty good.
Man, that's something to that part of the park. He hit some of the left field that I've never seen anybody hit the ball out to left field the way he did at Dish Falk a couple times. It's rare power. Visit wise, and I feel like I'm asking you this after a very successful weekend, probably hosting some guys, but in terms of visits, whether they're unofficial visits or official visits, what are the types of questions that you appreciate families and players asking? What are the types of things that you guys try to hit on during visits, but also the types of things that you hope parents and players are asking about you and your program as well?
It's hard to answer that because, to be honest with you, every situation is different. Is it an academic family that, wants to get in McComas School of Business? Or is he a baseball player that, wants a good degree, but he's not real sure what he wants to do yet, And so each situation is different. So when it comes to selling kids and what we have to offer, we want to do it specifically for that individual. But I think types of questions, I think the one thing is, whether a university or coach asks you, what are you looking for in a place? And a kid doesn't have an answer, it's a little bit of a turnoff just because where are they in this process? Are they really truly invested in making the right decisions? I love the kids that say, mom and dad say he goes home and he writes stuff down on paper and he's starting to, really analyze the decision. I think there's places where, hey, I grew up to be a Longhorn or, LSU Tiger, Florida Gator. They just grew up wanting to go to that place. They get the offer. It seems like a good fit. Perfect. That's a dream situation for families. Not all the time that's going to work out and happen. So be ready to know what you want in a university. Are you looking for a big environment? Are you looking for a smaller environment? From whether it's a city or university, really at the end of the day, what are you looking for? And I think that's being able to spend some time and really think about that and have genuine answers. If a staff asks you that, it goes a long ways, I know, in our book.
Sean, before we go, I don't know if anyone can see the entire little scoreboard behind you, but for those people that don't know Sean and his wife, Stephanie, are project doers. They can't sit still with their free time and always have home projects going on. And I know Stephanie built that scoreboard right there behind you. And you guys have such an amazing setup to host people and have friends over and get to do your main favorite hobby with barbecuing. So show it. Why don't you pan a little bit to your left a little bit and show people your barbecuing setup, and then talk about what your strengths are as a barbecue guy.
Yeah. Well, I have 4 smokers. You can't really see them. I'd show you, but they're kind of in the spots. There's a tree in the way of one of them. But it's funny. My dad liked to cook. It typically was red meat. It was usually steak. Liked to be on the grill. This time of year is probably my favorite time of the year just because I get a little baseball with fall ball. The weather's cooled off, gotten back into golf. So when I have time, I get to do that. But really, the long days of smoking a brisket and all that, when the weather's good, you got college football on, for me, it doesn't really get any better. than those types of days and having people over and enjoying that. I think I owe Dustin some food, but we've promised him some steak and beef ribs a couple episodes ago, what I did on his podcast before he left. So,
well, just for the record, we will take any types of food to get to be a guest on this podcast as a payment.
Yeah, we don't discriminate.
Yeah, it's I'll be honest with you, I haven't done it, this last spring, playing as long as we did, getting straight on the road. There hasn't been a whole lot of smoke rolling through that smoker yet, but we'll get to it this winter for sure.
So when fall ball ends up, what's the first thing that's going on the pit?
Depends what Costco has. Not a big, it's pretty much go to the meat aisle and like, yeah, that looks pretty good to cook. And the good thing is I've taught Stephanie what to look for, and she loves Costco. So every now and then I get surprised with what comes home and sit in the fridge. So
Stephanie at Costco sounds dangerous to me.
Yeah.
Every day. Every time she goes, it's dangerous.
Yeah. You're probably more excited about the Texas Monthly barbecue list today than you are talking to these two guys on here. But before we let you go, got a couple of minutes left, Sean. Again, thank you so much for the time. I know we have a lot of Texas fans that are listening. Maybe a couple of names fall wise from the pitching side that you think of, maybe not necessarily turned a corner or taken that huge step, but it just kind of, you guys are really excited about right now. Obviously it's easy to be excited about Tanner Witt and guys like that, but maybe a couple of guys that haven't thrown that much in the past that you're excited about.
Yeah, well, it's always good to, go into the fall knowing that you've got, 2 weekend starters that return. That makes things a lot better. Tanner's been solid. He actually got his brains beat in the other day, which is good for him. But it just shows. I think our group's well rounded even on the offensive side. But he's made a velocity jump. He's carrying average velocity deep into his outings, which that's the one thing that I've wanted to see. A kid that was on the team last year that's redshirted last year has been really, really good this fall. His name's LeBaron Johnson out of Florida. Big tick in velocity, and he's been dominant. It's been fun to watch. The kids love him. He's a little different personality and doing a great job of fitting in and having power stuff. Daniel Blair's a grad transfer that came in, another big arm, been up to 96 quite a bit for us, has quality stuff. The one thing I'll say with this staff is we're not going to lack stuff on the back end of the pen. It's just going to be a matter of how well we execute. So I'm excited about the group for sure. There's some left-handed options. A kid, Luke Harrison, came in, kind of opened up some eyes, really athletic, moves really well. He's a great example of a kid that.
Well, Sean, I know we have some Texas fans that are tuning in. On the pitching side, what are maybe a couple of names of guys that have impressed this fall, kind of maybe starting to show a little bit more on the developmental side? Guys, maybe some new faces that you're excited about. Obviously, I know it's easy to be excited about the Tanner Witts of the world and things like that. But what are a few guys that you think have kind of turned a corner a little bit or turned some heads in the fall so far?
Yeah, it's been good. I think there's definitely some guys that, Texas fans haven't seen pitch yet that they'll be excited about. Kid that was on the team last year, LeBaron Johnson out of Florida. We redshirted last year. Kind of a long, lanky kid that's put on about 15 or 20 pounds. Coach Couch, our strength and conditioning coach, has done an outstanding job with him. He's been pretty much sat 95 the entire fall with a really good breaking ball.
Wow.
He's been up to 97. And I honestly think there's more in there. So just getting him game experience and getting him, comfortable in the environment, I think is going to be big, but he's got a huge arm for us. A grad transfer named Daniel Blair has a lot of history. He's actually been a starter at the Division I level. We've had him more of in a relief role right now, but he's been good. 94 to 96 with a really good changeup, and he's been impressive and fun to watch, and just an older, mature approach to it. So, I think he's definitely going to help us.
Nice. Well, Drew, you got anything before we wrap this up?
No, I think Sean's covered it. Obviously missed the barbecue that was just right down the road, and having an extra dog sitter with Steph being close by too. I saw Everett went to his first Texas football game this weekend.
Yeah, he enjoyed that. About the second quarter, he had the nap and all that, and after that he woke up and he was ready to go see Bevo and all the rest of it. So he had a blast. It was really cool to see.
Cool. Yeah. And if there, before we sign off, if there's one piece of advice you would give a non-committed kid below their junior year, so a freshman or sophomore that's about to start this process, what is one piece of advice that you would give them?
Go be a kid. It's high school. I think there's so many things that I remember my high school career, and didn't have to worry about any of this, making phone calls to coaches and trying to have conversations with men that they really respect. It's a hard thing to do, and I get it. It's where we are now. You have to do those things, but go be a kid. I'll go back to Tanner Witt. We offered Tanner Witt as a freshman right when we got the job at Texas. We see him one day, and I'm like, yeah, of course you take the kid. Mm-hmm. The kid didn't commit, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was going into his senior year. He just bought on himself, bought in on himself, and was like, I'm going to do this when I'm ready, when I want to make this commitment. And I think at the end of the day, it just makes life that much better. Grow up, be a kid, be a 15, 16-year-old without these pressures of trying to find a school and all that. Just go work hard at baseball, go play, go have fun. And the right thing's going to happen for that kid if he just goes, enjoys it. I love the kids that I talk to, and they're like, Coach, I'm probably 2 years away from making a decision. And I'm like, awesome. Go have fun, go enjoy the game, go play the game without the pressure of trying to perform and do all those things in front of coaches. And I think coaches see that as well. If they don't respect that when you tell them that, it's probably not a place you want to be at anyways.
Yeah, it's great advice. And trust me, if you're really good, the Sean Allens of the world will find you. They will find you, and there are a lot of different paths to take. Just look at some of the guys incoming at Texas, coming from the JUCO level, maybe a transfer here or there, whatever it is. If you're a good baseball player, you don't necessarily have to pull the trigger when you're before your sophomore year on a commitment or anything like that. So I think it's great advice. Go out there, have fun, be a kid. I just, one of the reasons why Drew and I do this is I think of all the things I didn't know when I was that age, like 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, just yeah, I'm still learning stuff now. It's just man, if I would have known that then, not necessarily saying things would be different, but it's just really good knowledge to have. And there's so much pressure put on kids right now to people start having anxiety when they're 2 years away from their senior year and they're not committed. Trust me, if you're good, you will find a place to play baseball. But Sean, thank you so much for your time. I'm going to come over there and bug you guys at some point, probably next couple of weeks, definitely for a fall World Series game. Go see how you guys are doing. But you guys are doing a fantastic job over there at Texas in terms of doing things the right way. Recruiting's at a high level right now. It's been really fun to watch you guys. I'll be watching you guys from afar, which would be a little weird, especially for Drew. Thanks again so much for jumping on and passing on some wisdom. I really think that the people listening are going to get a lot out of this. And best of luck with the rest of the fall, and hope everybody's healthy. Ends up being healthy. Those guys coming back from rehab, I think, can really help you guys. But should be a really exciting year for baseball getting on the 40 acres.
Yeah, I appreciate y'all's time, and I think it's awesome that y'all are doing this for families, because there's no doubt. I mean, most families, they're only going to go through it one time. So I think as much information, that real information, there's a lot of information out there that, isn't real, and that's not really how the process works. So having, a couple of guys that know it in and out, giving that information to these kids, it's invaluable. And it's really cool that what y'all are doing to help these families out.
Thanks again to Sean for jumping on and being the guinea pig as the first guest of the Five Tool Baseball podcast. First of hopefully many, I should add. We definitely plan to have certainly a lot of college coaches on, probably maybe a college or pro player, maybe a high school player, maybe a scout. First of many, hopefully, because as I've learned in my years of podcasting and radio, the interviews are always more interesting. Not that I don't love that what Drew and I talk about and think it's good and we've gotten positive feedback, but the interviews certainly add a very unique perspective and dynamic to this. And that's exactly what Sean did. Drew, what are kind of a couple of things that he said that stood out to you? We kind of covered a lot of ground with him. Are you there?
Hey, it stopped. So
what stopped?
I don't know. You froze and I didn't hear anything. A couple times, like the video freezes, but sorry. I guess we'll
Okay.
Start that over. Sick internet here in Fate, Texas.
Let's see here. All right, I'll count us down again. All right. 3, 2, 1. Thanks again to Sean for jumping on and being our first guest, the guinea pig of the Five Tool Baseball podcast, the first guy on, and first of what we hope to be many. We definitely want to have a lot more college coaches on. We have already reached out to a few more because as much as I love what Drew and I talk about, my years of podcasting and sports radio have taught me that the interviews are always better. It's just, these guys can offer such a unique perspective in that they're certainly living it. We talk about recruiting and evaluation and playing the game and stuff like that. Well, Sean Allen is living it. And he's a guy that's lived it a lot of different ways, all different schools, different roles and that sort of thing. But we covered a lot of ground with him. Drew, what are maybe a couple of things that stood out to you from that conversation?
Yeah, I had a couple of main things. First off, when you're listening to the podcast, don't shut it off when we start talking about barbecue, because I got hungry and brought that up too soon. Because Sean made a couple important points after, so I'd hate for anyone to miss that. But a couple of things that really stuck out to me were, when we asked him what kind of stuff he's looking for when he goes to watch a guy play, and I think the term he used was a top step guy. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's crucial that people understand that when you're playing, it can't be fake, but the guys that love baseball, that stuff sticks out. And if you're a top step guy, like Sean was talking about, it's like, well, you're 0 for 2 on the day, but are you sitting in the corner of the dugout pouting, or are you at the top step cheering your teammates on, involved in the game, ready to get that next at bat, wanting to go back out in the field and get that ground ball hit to you? It's something that you can use as a separator, because like we said, at every level you go up, the talent only improves. So if you can do something like that to stand out, it's something that people look for, because the guys that play the game right and play the game hard all the time, those are the exception now, which is something that was probably flipped over the last 15 to 20 years. But, you can separate yourself by really playing hard and playing the game the right way. But another thing that Sean mentioned that I thought really stuck out to me was when we asked him, what kind of stuff or what kind of things do you want to hear from a recruit when you're talking to them? And just simply being ready to answer the question, what are you looking for in a college, when a coaching staff or a recruiting coordinator asks you, goes a long way, because, you don't just wake up in the middle of a recruiting conversation in a coach's office. You would have known that you were going on this visit or getting ready to be on this phone call. And if you haven't taken the small amount of time to, sit down and think about what it is you're looking for in a college or a baseball program, then that says something to a coach. being able to articulate the things that are important to you, whether it be the academics or, playing at a big school or a certain degree program, not that you have to know any of those things, but having an idea of what the key factors in your recruitment are going to be, really, really shows that you're invested in the process.
Yeah. And that's one thing we mentioned way back when we were going through the 5 till 55, those late July games where it's hot. You might have lost the game before. You might be out of trophy contention. You might have played 12 tournaments leading into that. Are you still playing hard? And that stands out. And like you said, that wasn't the norm 2 decades ago, which I actually think Sean mentioned, it used to be the other way. Like if you didn't play hard, it stood out. And now it's, if you're playing hard all the time and you're that energetic guy that just wants to go attack and have fun with the game, that stands out in the fall right now. The fall is an interesting time. It's oftentimes you're maybe working on some things. Maybe you're getting some innings on the mound to try to work on a new pitch or whatever it is. But what's your energy level? Are you out there competing regardless of results? Because guess what? You're going to have an 0 for 4 game in college. You're probably going to have a lot of them. Even the best players have those. And I thought it was also interesting that he said, from a position player standpoint, to try to get a feel for a guy, how he plays, how he approaches the game, they'll try to sit on him for, I think he said 25 at bats or something like that, which is about 4 games, give or take. And if this schedule allows it, which is something we didn't really get into, but I'd love to ask him, hey, by the way, what do you think of these schedules when they're kind of spread out and you've got to cover an entire metroplex to get some and hopefully the games are on time and all that other stuff. But they sit on a guy for a while to try to get a feel for who he is. How does he carry himself? Like Sean mentioned, how does he interact with his teammates? And, I thought it was interesting to hear him say that, they obviously want talent, but Coach Pierce tells them, we want to build the best team. We don't want to just necessarily grab the most talented players. They look for certain fits of who fits their program. And he brought up the Tulo element, that Tulo's helped really emphasize indirectly or directly about how much makeup matters at the collegiate level. And that if you have a bunch of guys that play really hard and are mentally tough, and you have a team like that, you can win a lot of games. And I think that last year's Texas team was a good example of that. That 2018 team that went to Omaha, I think was a lot like that as well. That, you've got to have talent, you've got to have skill, you got to have experience. But if you've got a group of guys that are mentally tough and play really hard, you could win a lot of games in college baseball. So that stood out to me as well. And maybe to me, the most impactful thing, and I was kind of fist pumping under my desk when he said this about being a kid still, and he mentioned, kind of the way college baseball is right now. A lot of early commitments happen, and that's a thing that's going to happen. I think Texas has taken a couple over the last few months. And it's if a really, really, really good baseball player wants to commit to your program, it's almost impossible to say no. But his advice about being a kid and, the Tanner Witt example, I think you brought it up, Drew, that, or maybe it was him, that how early he was offered and when he committed was years later. And he was totally comfortable being who he was, betting on himself and doing that sort of thing. So I really appreciated hearing that. Hey, if you're 2 years away from a commitment, awesome. Be upfront, honest with the coaches. They will appreciate it. Trust me, they will appreciate it, and they'll probably enjoy it. Oh man, we don't have to worry about trying to take a commitment from this kid before he's even a sophomore in high school.
Right. I mean, you get to spend time developing a relationship and figuring out who the kid is, and he gets to figure out who you are. And if you've done your homework and you've really researched into a program, you're going to have a better idea if it's a place that you want to be, number one, if it's a place that you will invest in and really put in the work, because like we've talked about a million times, this is a hard game. Yeah. And you're going to have periods and stretches where you're not so good and you don't love baseball when you're 0 for 12, and if you're willing, Coach Pierce talked about this a lot. if you're willing to stick through that, you know, if you're at the right place, there's a greater likelihood that you're willing to tough it out and get through it instead of just kind of going the other direction and letting it spiral out of control. And it's important. And I think, like you mentioned, the roster construction, that was something that I noticed when that staff came in, when I had already been there, was that there's a lot of conversations and a lot of intent behind creating that roster.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, it's not just, you know, all the big armed lefties. It's hey, let's get a funky little lefty that we can bring in for a couple big outs.
Mm-hmm.
And that might be the difference in our season. And as we've seen it a lot of times, especially you get to that upper level in the postseason, those can be huge outs. And those role players, like Sean mentioned, the kid that stole the base for Mississippi State, you know, ultimately that was the winning run. And it was off a single that he wouldn't have scored if he hadn't been on second base. So, you know, those role players, you know, that's when I thought that, you know, Coach Pierce had really been able to settle in and create his team and have his program, was when we started having players that fit those types of roles. You know, because early on it's about collecting talent and seeing what works out. But
Mm-hmm.
now Texas has gotten to a point in the recruiting process where they're looking for specific things. You know, Sean and Phillip can go out looking for, oh, I want a left-handed catcher, or I want a guy that can play second, short, and third and be our utility guy. And, you know, you have a guy like that in Murphy Staley, and those guys can make a huge difference. If someone goes down, you know, Cam Williams missed some time and Murphy Staley was ready and came in and gave us some huge weekends at third base last year. And, you know, that, like you said, that can be the difference in your record of whether or not you host a regional or a super regional or top 8 seed or whatever it is. All those games matter. And if you have a lineup and a roster that's constructed in the right way, you know, it can keep you from spiraling out of control if you hit a rough patch.
Yeah. And I think those role players only emerge if you have a healthy program from the standpoint of team chemistry and development and people understanding their roles and things like that. You know, it'd be really easy for a Murphy Staley to come in and say, hey, I was a JUCO guy. I signed here. Because what do we think about JUCO guys when they sign? They're going to play a lot right away. Right. So it'd be easy to, oh man, I'm not playing. Oh, this other JUCO guy beat me out. I'm going to leave, or I'm not going to do this, that, or whatever. Like, you look around college baseball at the most successful programs, even these ones that collect a ton of great talent year in and year out, the health of the program, it really shows with those role guys, you know, those guys that might not be the future second or third round pick, but can play a very, very critical component to team success. And I think that those things, it's not an accident when teams that have good chemistry and programs that have done a good job of building from the bottom up in terms of establishing roles and how they go about development and the team concept and things like that. It's not a surprise when those programs achieve like that, because you know, they put the time and the work into that. And I think you look across, you know, college baseball, I know it pains you and it pains him to mention the Mississippi State player, but I feel like every team that wins in Omaha has something like that, you know, like
you have to.
You have to. That's how you win. You know, the most successful Texas teams, when they went to the College World Series and won, had that. You know, like how many people knew David Monroe before he went nuts in Omaha? You know, and ended up being the most outstanding player at that event. You know, the Chris Carmichaels of the world and things like that. Like every great team that ends up winning at Omaha has those kind of players, and a big reason why is that they're, you know, their recruiting and their staff chemistry and the development they do from the mental side really empowers those players to be comfortable with not running away from the challenge and understanding how they can impact the program. But yeah, just a lot of great stuff from Sean, just covering a wide range of things. You know, we talked about on the previous episode about, you know, visits and things like that. And I was really encouraged to hear that, like, he was like, hey, not every visit's the same. You know, it just really depends on what the kid is interested in. If he's a big time academic guy that wants to get to the business school, cool. We're going to focus our attention there. Maybe if he's years away from that and it's more on the baseball side, hey, we're going to focus our intention here on this visit, which really reinforces the point that parents, players, when you're going on these visits and you're communicating with these programs, tell them what you're interested in. Tell them, that way you can get the most out of that experience. And you're learning what you want to learn about on these visits or during these conversations or at these camps or whatever it is in the recruiting process.
Yeah. Well, like we said before, the honesty is what's going to help with the fit. Because if you're not honest with them about what you're looking for, they're not going to have any idea how to present to you the things that you are looking for.
Right.
And, it can waste a lot of people's time. And, if you end up committing to a place that you don't have the full picture about it, you might end up transferring, and so, like you said, just spend some time in it, figure out what is important to you and communicate that with the coaches. And because you may not take a visit because a coach figures out and says, hey, well, if those are the things you're interested in, this might not be the best place for you. Or at the same time, they may say, well, this might be the perfect place for you because the things that you that matter to you line up with what we do really well. And so, I think it just, like we said, it's a two-way street from the schools to the kids. But you can learn a lot and they can present you with a lot if they know what you're looking for.
Yeah. Yeah. And also another point he made too about, late recruiting process. It's something that we've talked about using examples like Corey Knable and Bryce Elder, and he even kind of joked that if programs are saying they don't have money late in the process, I don't know how true that is, because there are so many unpredictable things that happen now with the transfer portal, transfers happening with the draft. You never quite know how the draft is going to go. How many times have we seen guys at Texas, Drew, that we think they're either going to go and they somehow, for some reason, don't end up going, or they get drafted and you don't think they're going to sign at the last minute they sign, something happens. There's so many things that can kind of happen to impact that process. And it's really, really, really tough to project the 11.7 and how much money you have. And that number is always kind of floating around. But oftentimes at the end of the cycle,
it's like the salary cap.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how coaches do it, man. Just juggling that kind of number. And it just feels like it's constantly changing. And just things that you just don't predict happen. And, but it does afford programs an opportunity for a rising senior, had a great senior season. Maybe he's putting on a show in the playoffs. There will be a place for that guy. So, if like we say, it's hard not to have anxiety right now as a senior, if you're not committed and you really want to play college baseball. I get it, man. It's tough. It would wear on me a little bit mentally too, especially because you're looking around at teammates and things like that. But there are going to be places. There are going to be programs that have money. There are going to be guys that are going to be on the lookout for adding people to their programs late in the recruiting process.
No doubt. No doubt.
So, well, that wraps up episode 12 of the Five-Tooled Baseball Podcast. Thank you again so much to Sean Allen for joining us today, University of Texas pitching coach and recruiting coordinator. You can follow him on Twitter. I believe it's Sean Allen 3, but more importantly, I think it's Meat Sweats 3 on Instagram, where he shows off his barbecue prowess and things like that. Certainly,
don't look at it if you haven't eaten yet.
Yeah. Wait until after you eat, or certainly don't make the mistake of mentioning the Texas monthly barbecue list like I did, and then the meats, because then you get especially hungry as well. So yeah, we're finishing recording this around lunchtime, which thankfully is good because I'm getting hungry just talking about it. But thank you again so much for listening. You can find us on Podbean. You can hit the follow button on there. Just search for Five-Tooled Baseball Podcast, or you can find us on Apple Podcasts. Search for the same thing, Five-Tooled Baseball Podcast. Follow our Facebook pages, Five-Tool on Facebook, Five-Tool on Twitter. We're all over the place on social media, Instagram, TikTok. We're there, but you can, if you look a little bit, you can find our podcast. But thank you so much for listening. We're going to hit 2,000 downloads this week, which is awesome. It's just really continues to exceed my expectations, and we really appreciate the feedback. And we hope that this finds its way to more parents, more players, more people that are either going through the recruiting process or will start going through the recruiting process in the future. We hope this can be a great resource for you. But until we talk to y'all next time, have a good Monday, have a good week, and take care.